I'll never forget that moment, when the hands of the very son I had carried and birthed pressed down on my shoulders, not for an embrace, but to send me sprawling onto the cold, hard floor. On Christmas Eve, of all nights. "This seat belongs to my father-in-law. Get up," he said, his voice as cold as ice, in front of the entire family, all just to give my seat to his wealthy father-in-law. My name is Judith Harrison. I'm 72 years old, and I'm a woman who spent her entire life building a real estate empire from scratch right here in Boston. And it was in that moment I decided the greatest lesson I would ever teach my son wouldn't be how to make money, but the steep price of ingratitude. If my story touches your heart, and I hope it does, maybe you'll share a story of your own in the comments below, because sometimes, sharing our stories is the best medicine we've got. The car glided in silence through the lit-up streets of Brookline, one of Boston's wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, just a light dusting, blanketing the manicured lawns and the Christmas wreaths hanging on massive oak doors in a thin veil of white. It all looked so perfect, like a winter postcard. But inside that warm car, a cold storm was brewing inside of me. I, Judith Harrison, was on my way to my son's house for dinner, and for the first time in my life, I felt like an unwanted guest. In the pocket of my thick cashmere coat, my fingers unconsciously fiddled with a dark blue velvet box. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, was the gold Patek Philippe watch that had belonged to Arthur, my late husband. It was the gift I'd given him for our 25th wedding anniversary, and he wore it every single day until his last. Arthur used to say, "Judith, this watch doesn't just count the hours, it marks the moments we have together. One day, give it to Ethan, so he remembers that a family is built on moments, not on contracts." I had always intended to give it to Ethan on a truly important day, his wedding day, the day his first child was born, but I'd hesitated, and now I felt like my own time was running short. A dry cough had been clinging to me for weeks, and my right hand, the same hand that once signed million-dollar checks, would sometimes tremble uncontrollably. I knew it was time. The car pulled up to a Georgian-style red brick mansion, the very house I had bought with my own money for Ethan and my daughter-in-law Megan as a wedding gift. It was too big, too ostentatious for my taste, but Megan had insisted on it. Golden light poured from every window, promising a cozy atmosphere. But as the driver opened my door, a bitter wind cut straight to the bone, and I knew that promise was a lie. Ethan opened the door. At 42, my son looked sharp in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He was tall and handsome, inheriting his father's good looks. But in his eyes, I no longer saw the warmth of the little boy who used to follow me around construction sites. I only saw the anxiousness of a man trying to impress someone. "Mom, you're here. Merry Christmas." He gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. His hand patted my back, but it felt like he was just trying to hurry me inside. "Hello, Ethan. You look wonderful," I smiled, trying to hide my disappointment. As soon as I stepped inside, Megan glided over, a glass of champagne in her hand. She wore a deep red silk dress that clung to her slender frame. Megan was always beautiful, a sharp, calculated kind of beauty. "Mother Judith, I'm so glad you could make it." Her voice was sweet as honey, but her eyes darted quickly toward the living room. "My father, Walter, just arrived. He's so looking forward to seeing you." I understood immediately. The guest of honor tonight was not me. In the living room, Walter Jennings, Megan's father, sat in the largest armchair by the fireplace. At 75, he still radiated a kind of shrewd power, an investor who saw the world only through the lens of profits and losses. He was a shark, and my son was desperately trying to swim in his wake. "Judith," he nodded, not bothering to stand. "Good of you to join us." "Walter," I replied, my voice even. "Christmas Eve is for family, isn't it?" Ethan quickly jumped in, his tone a bit strained. "Mom, have a seat. Can I get you something to drink?" I let out a small cough, trying to suppress the tickle in my throat. "Just a glass of water, thank you, dear." My right hand trembled slightly as I took the glass from my son. Did Ethan see it? No. His eyes were glued to Walter, like a schoolboy waiting for his teacher's approval. He saw an old, frail mother who was embarrassing him, not the woman who built the very world he was standing in. He didn't see the cough, or the trembling hand, or the loneliness in my eyes. He just saw an obstacle between him and his father-in-law's admiration. My 2 grandchildren, Liam and Sophia, came running down the stairs. "Grandma!" They threw their arms around me, the only sincere, warm embraces I received that evening. Liam, at 16, was nearly as tall as me but still had the awkwardness of a teenager, and Sophia, 13, chattered away like a little songbird. "Did you bring us presents?" Sophia whispered in my ear. "Of course, my little angel," I smiled, stroking her hair, "but you have to wait until after dinner." Dinner was served in the grand dining room, at a long wooden table that could seat 20. Everything was perfect: the gleaming silverware, the sparkling crystal glasses, and a golden roasted turkey sitting in the center. But that perfection only made the atmosphere more stifling. The conversation revolved entirely around Walter and his business deals, the stock market, investment opportunities in Asia. Ethan eagerly participated, laughing too loudly at Walter's flat jokes, nodding vigorously at his every opinion. I felt like I was watching a bad play, and my son was the lead actor. The children and I were mostly silent. I tried to ask about their school, about Liam's soccer games, but our conversation was quickly drowned out by financial jargon and unfamiliar names. I felt invisible, a ghost from the past sitting at a feast for the future, a future that, it seemed, had no place for me. And then, it happened. The moment that would change everything. As everyone began to take their seats, I instinctively moved toward the chair at the head of the table, opposite Ethan. It was the host's chair. When Arthur was alive, he sat there. After he passed, and our family dinners moved to Ethan's house, that seat became mine by default. It wasn't just a place to sit. It was a symbol, a recognition of my position as the mother, the matriarch, the founder of this family's fortune. I had sat there for the past 5 years, at every holiday, every birthday. But just as I pulled the chair out, Ethan spoke, his voice hesitant but firm. "Mother, please." I stopped, turning to look at him, confused. "What is it, son?" He avoided my eyes, glancing toward Walter Jennings, who stood waiting with a placid expression. "That seat. I've saved it for Mr. Walter tonight. He's our guest of honor." It felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water in my face. The entire room seemed to fall silent. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Megan looked down, pretending to adjust her napkin. The children, Liam and Sophia, froze, their eyes wide as they looked between us. Walter just stood there, arms crossed, the faintest hint of a smirk on his lips. He was enjoying this. "But, Ethan," I tried to keep my voice from shaking, "this was always your father's seat, and now it's mine. I've sat here for years." "I know, Mother," Ethan said, his voice starting to fray with impatience. "But tonight is different. Please, don't make this difficult." "Difficult?" I repeated, unable to believe my ears. "Son, this is my place in this family. You can't just—" That's when he stepped forward. He didn't argue anymore. He didn't explain. He placed both his hands on my shoulders, the same hands I once held when I taught him how to take his first steps. But this time, they weren't gentle. I said, "Please move." And then, he shoved me. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a firm, decisive, cruel shove. A shove from my own 4 2-year-old son to his 7 2-year-old mother. I was completely caught off guard. My old body couldn't fight it. I stumbled back a few steps, and then I went down, sprawling onto the cold marble floor. Thud. The sound echoed in the dead silence of the room. A sharp pain shot up from my hip and radiated through my body, but it was nothing compared to the shock, the utter humiliation. I lay there, on the floor of my son's home, in front of my grandchildren, in front of a stranger. "Grandma!" Sophia screamed, her voice breaking into a sob. Liam rushed to my side, his face pale with fear. "Grandma, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. I could only look up. I saw Megan raise a hand to her mouth, but her eyes held a look of triumph. I saw Walter Jennings, standing perfectly still, his expression unchanged, like an emperor witnessing an execution. And I saw Ethan, my son. He stood there, towering by the empty chair, looking down at me with a cold, ruthless expression I had never seen before in my life. At that same moment, the velvet box in my coat pocket flew out, landing on the floor beside me. The lid popped open. Arthur's gold watch glittered under the chandelier, its mother-of-pearl face seeming to mock me. Legacy, love, time, everything I held dear, now lying discarded on the floor, just like me. Ethan glanced at the watch, a fleeting, dismissive look. Then he turned to Walter Jennings and gestured to the chair. "Mr. Walter." His voice rang out, clear and steady, as if nothing had happened. "Please, this seat belongs to you." In that instant, as I lay on that cold floor, the physical pain faded away, replaced by something else. It wasn't hot anger, it wasn't bitter sorrow, it was clarity. A cold, razor-sharp clarity. The veil of a mother's blind love had been torn away. I saw my son, not as the boy I had loved, but as the man he had become. My unconditional love died in that instant, right there on that marble floor, and from its ashes, something else was born, a steely resolve, a quiet rage. Liam and Sophia helped me up. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," Liam whispered, his eyes welling with tears. "It's all right, my dears," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. "I'm all right." But I wasn't all right. Something inside of me had shattered, and I knew that when those pieces came back together, they would form something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. My son had made his choice. Tonight, he had chosen status over love, money over dignity, and I, his mother, had made mine. Tonight, I would teach him his final lesson, a lesson in consequences, a lesson he would never, ever forget. The game had changed, and I, Judith Harrison, was about to flip the board. Liam and Sophia helped me to my feet. Their young hands trembled, trying to support the weight of an old body and a broken heart. My hip ached, but I pushed the pain down. I would not show weakness, not now. I brushed off my wool dress, an absent gesture to regain some small piece of my lost dignity. I looked up. The entire table was staring at me, shrouded in a bizarre silence. Ethan stood frozen, a flicker of regret in his eyes that was quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive look. Megan didn't even bother to hide her annoyance, as if my presence on her floor was a stain on her perfect party. Only Walter Jennings allowed himself a slight, almost invisible smirk. I saw it. He was savoring this drama. "Do you need to sit down for a minute, Mother?" Ethan asked, his voice hollow, avoiding my gaze. "No, thank you," I replied, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I'll sit right here." I pointed to a spare chair, a smaller one set at the corner of the table, the kind of place reserved for latecomers or children, not important enough for the main table. It was a deliberate act of submission. I wanted them to see me accept the new place they had assigned me. I sat down, my back straight, even as the pain throbbed. The meal resumed, but it was a charade. They tried to talk and laugh, tried to ignore the image of their mother, their grandmother, having just been pushed to the floor. But an invisible abyss had opened up right down the middle of that table. Every clink of a fork against a plate sounded like shattering glass. Every laugh from Walter and Ethan felt like a whip cracking the air. The fragrant roasted turkey, a recipe I had taught Megan myself, now tasted like ash in my mouth. I didn't eat. I just sat there, watching. I watched how my son hurried to fill his father-in-law's wine glass, how he nodded at every word the man said, like a puppet on a string. I watched how Megan glanced at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, and I watched my grandchildren. They didn't speak another word. Liam stared down at his plate, while Sophia would occasionally look up at me, her big, round eyes full of worry and confusion. They were the only innocent souls in that room full of pretense, and it was for them that I knew I had to act. Halfway through the meal, I felt I could no longer breathe in that toxic air. "Excuse me," I said, gently placing my napkin on the table. "I'm feeling a bit tired. I'm just going to step out on the porch for a breath of fresh air." "Do you need me to come with you?" Ethan asked, an empty social courtesy. "No, dear, you enjoy yourself." I stood up, every step an effort. The glass door to the back patio was unlocked. I stepped outside. The frigid December air hit my face, my lungs, biting but clean. It cleared my head. The snow was falling thicker now, covering the meticulously kept garden in a pristine white blanket. From here, through the glass, I could see the dining room, blazing with light. They looked like the perfect family in a Christmas snow globe, but I knew the truth. Inside that globe, it was all just shattered glass. I stood there in the darkness, letting the cold seep into my bones. And then, I heard them. Voices, drifting from Ethan's study, where the window was cracked open just enough to let the sound escape into the backyard. Ethan's voice, Walter's, and Megan's. They had moved in there to talk business. With Harrison Properties as collateral, there isn't a bank in Boston that would dare turn us down. That was Ethan, his voice thick with a reckless kind of pride. This is a golden opportunity, Mr. Walter. This biotech is going to change the world. A deep, gravelly laugh from Walter. The opportunity is sound, son, but your mother is the problem. She's too cautious, too set in her ways. She'd never sign off on a deal with this level of risk. Don't you worry, Daddy. That was Megan, her voice like honey laced with poison. His mother is getting old. After tonight, she'll be too hurt and tired to put up a fight. Ethan will slowly take the reins. In a few months, when we present the plan, she'll just nod along. My ears were ringing. So, this wasn't just a spontaneous act of disrespect. This was a plan, a calculated conspiracy. They didn't just want my seat at the table. They wanted my legacy, my life's work. They wanted to use the very company I had built with my own sweat, tears, and blood from the ashes after Arthur died to fund their greedy gamble. That shove wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate attack, meant to shake my spirit, to turn me into a doddering old woman who was easy to manipulate. They had sorely underestimated me. I turned and walked silently back into the house through a side door. I passed the dining room, where my grandchildren were still sitting, looking lost. I smiled at them, a smile I hoped looked normal. Grandma's going to head home, my loves. I'm not feeling my best. Grandma, Sophia started to say something, but I put a finger to her lips. Sleep well, my little Angle. I grabbed my coat. Ethan and his co-conspirators were still in the study, too busy divvying up an empire that wasn't yet theirs. I left without anyone even noticing. The drive home felt endless. Boston at night was beautiful, the strings of Christmas lights sparkling like diamond necklaces draped across the old streets. But to me, they were just cold, fake lights. I didn't cry. Tears are for sadness, for loss. What was boiling in my chest now wasn't sadness. It was something more primal, more powerful. It was the rage of a lioness who sees her cub threatened, and my legacy, Harrison Properties, was the child I had birthed from sheer will and resilience. When I got to my penthouse in Beacon Hill, the place I've lived for 50 years, I went straight to my study. This was my sanctuary, my command center. The walls were paneled in dark cherry wood, lined with books on law, architecture, and history. High shelves held miniature models of the buildings I had built. And on the massive oak desk, there was only one photograph. Arthur and me, with a tiny, grinning Ethan, on the site of our very first construction project. I switched on the green banker's lamp. The soft light illuminated my face in the large mirror on the wall. I looked at the woman staring back. I saw the lines around her eyes, earned from sleepless nights of worry and work. I saw the snow-white hair, and I saw the eyes. They weren't tired anymore. They were burning. My doctor had told me I didn't have much time left. The cancer I'd been quietly fighting for 2 years was coming back. Maybe I had a year, maybe less. I didn't have time for gentle lessons. I didn't have time to wait for Ethan to see the error of his ways. I had to act, decisively, ruthlessly. I had to destroy the world I built for him, so he would have a chance to rebuild his own character from the rubble. This was no longer about revenge. This was a necessary surgery. Painful, yes, but meant to save his soul. I sat down in my familiar leather chair, feeling its solidness beneath me. I picked up the phone. It was time to unleash the storm. The first call, midnight, Samuel Black, my lawyer for 30 years. It rang 4 times before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep. Judith? What's wrong? It's the middle of the night. Sam, I apologize for the hour. My voice was ice, devoid of all emotion. I need you to execute the scorched earth protocol, effective immediately. There was silence on the other end of the line. Sam knew exactly what scorched earth meant. It was a contingency plan we had drafted years ago in case of a hostile takeover. I never dreamed I would use it against my own son. Judith, are you sure? Sam asked, his voice full of disbelief. This is irreversible. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Sam. Revoke Ethan Harrison's power of attorney at Harrison Properties and all its subsidiaries. Terminate every personal financial guarantee I have ever signed. The mortgage on the Brookline house, the lease on his Mercedes, the American Express Platinum cards. I want him cut off, legally and completely, before the sun comes up. Send all necessary notifications to the banks. I want his creditors calling him at breakfast. Good Lord, Judith, what on earth happened? My son showed me my place in his world, Sam. Now it's time I showed him his place in mine. The second call. 12:15 a.m. Evelyn Reed, my chief financial officer, a sharp and loyal woman. Evelyn, it's Judith, I said as soon as she answered. Mrs. Harrison, is everything all right? Everything is about to be put in its proper order, Evelyn. As of this moment, I want you to freeze all salary, bonuses, benefits, and corporate expense accounts related to the Executive Vice President, Ethan Harrison. Suspend his access to all internal financial systems, effective 8 a.m. Ma'am, Evelyn hesitated, this will trigger immediate defaults on his financial commitments. The banks will move very quickly. That's precisely the point, Evelyn, I replied. Let the consequences fall where they may. Thank you. The third call, 12:30 a.m. George Miller, my right-hand man, Arthur's best friend, the man who had been with me since the very beginning. This was the hardest one. George? Judith? Why are you calling this late? Was everything okay at the party? His voice was warm and full of concern. My heart constricted. No, George, nothing is okay. I told him. Not in the voice of a CEO, but in the voice of a wounded mother. I told him about the chair, the shove, about Arthur's watch on the floor. I didn't need to tell him about the financial plot. George understood. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear his heavy sigh. I don't know what to say, Judith. The boy, he's not a boy anymore, George. He's a man who made his choice, and I need your help. First thing in the morning, before anyone gets to the office, I need you to go there. Clear out Ethan's office of every personal item, his degrees, the family photos, the trinkets. Box it all up and put it in storage. I want him to walk into an empty room. Judith, please, George pleaded. He's your son. Not anymore, George. My voice hardened. Tonight, he chose to be Walter Jennings' son. Now he's going to learn what it means to have nothing. After you've cleared the room, I want you to place this note on the center of his desk. I read him the words I had composed. And George, I added, tomorrow morning, when the board receives notification of Ethan's termination, I want you to accept my nomination for the position of interim executive vice president. Another pause. Then, his voice full of resolve. I understand, Judith. It will be done. When I hung up the phone, the room was silent. Outside, the snow had stopped. The night sky was clear and full of stars. I walked to the window and looked out over the sleeping city. My legacy. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no victory. I just felt a profound, bottomless emptiness. The storm had been set in motion. The lightning had been launched. And I knew that when the sun rose, it wouldn't bring a peaceful Christmas morning. It would bring ruin. I looked at the photo on my desk. Arthur was smiling, holding a tiny Ethan in his arms. I'm sorry, my love, I whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't protect our son from himself. The storm is coming, Ethan. I didn't sleep. How could I, when I was personally dismantling the life of my own child? I sat in that leather chair in my study, the glass of water long empty, and just watched the night bleed away. The black sky in the east slowly turned to a charcoal gray, then a faint pink, heralding the arrival of a new day, Christmas Day. A day for togetherness, for forgiveness. But for the Harrison family, it was going to be a day of reckoning. I could just picture it. Ethan, my son, was probably sleeping soundly in his king-sized bed next to Megan, fresh off a night of imagined victory. He was likely dreaming of skyscrapers, of billion-dollar deals, of the admiration in Walter Jennings' eyes. He had no idea that while he was dreaming, his real world was being taken apart, piece by piece, quietly and precisely. Every call I'd made was a time bomb, and their detonation was set for dawn. 8 a.m., the first death knell. At the Brookline mansion, Ethan would probably be stretching, feeling pleased with himself. Last night's dinner, by his standards, was a roaring success. He'd asserted his position, he'd pleased his father-in-law. The only wrinkle was his mother's little fit, but he'd likely told himself, "She's old, she'll get over it." He didn't understand that a mother's fury doesn't just get over it, it transforms. When he reached for his phone on the nightstand, he'd see something unusual. Not a few Christmas texts, but a screen lit up with a flood of notifications, emails, messages, and a string of missed calls. Then the phone would start ringing, and it wouldn't stop. The first call would probably be from the Risk Management Department at Bank of America. "Mr. Harrison, we're calling to inform you about the $5 million mortgage on your Brookline property. As the primary guarantor, Mrs. Judith Harrison officially withdrew her backing at 7:55 a.m. this morning. Your loan has gone into technical default. As per the terms, we require the full remaining balance to be paid within 24 hours. Ethan would have laughed, thinking it was some kind of stupid Christmas prank. "There must be a mistake," he'd say, his voice still thick with sleep. "There is no mistake, sir. We've received the legal documentation from Mrs. Harrison's attorney." Click. The phone would immediately ring again. This time, Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan Harrison. We regret to inform you that the lease on your new S-Class has been terminated due to the co-signer withdrawing their name. We will be sending an agent to retrieve the vehicle later today. Please leave the keys inside." Ethan's sleepiness would vanish. A cold, creeping sense of dread would start to crawl up his spine. He'd look over at Megan, but she'd still be asleep, her face peaceful. The phone would ring again. American Express, Centurion Card Division. The voice on the other end, polite but frigid. "Mr. Harrison, we are required to inform you that all credit cards issued in your name and backed by Mrs. Judith Harrison's primary account have been indefinitely suspended. All transactions will be declined." Now, real panic would set in. Ethan would be out of bed, pacing the room, his hair a mess. What the hell was going on? This had to be a nightmare. It had to be. His mother couldn't. She wouldn't do this. She was just angry. He would try to call me, but my phone was off. I didn't want to hear the pleading, the accusations. It was too late. He would have to face this alone. He'd call his office, his private secretary, but her voice would be trembling. "Mr. Harrison, I can't connect you. Your security access has been deactivated. There was an email from HR that just went out to everyone." Ethan would rush to his laptop. There, at the very top of his inbox, would be an email with the subject line, "Announcement regarding senior leadership changes." He clicked on it, his hand trembling. The letter was short, cold, and brutally public. "The Board of Directors of Harrison Properties hereby announces that as of 9 a.m. on December 25th, the employment of Executive Vice President Mr. Ethan Harrison has been terminated, effective immediately, for irreconcilable reasons. We are pleased to announce the appointment of Mr. George Miller to the position of Interim Executive Vice President. All related business inquiries should now be directed to Mr. Miller's office. Signed, Judith Harrison, Chairwoman of the Board." The laptop nearly slipped from his grasp. Fired, by email, on Christmas morning. The humiliation of it was worse than losing the title. His mother wasn't just punishing him. She was publicly erasing him from her empire. "No way, no way," he muttered, a wild look in his eyes. The noise woke Megan. She sat up, her face a mask of irritation. "Ethan, what is all that racket?" "My mother, she fired me. She's taking everything back. The house, the car, the credit cards." The color drained from Megan's beautiful face. The irritation vanished, replaced by a flash of panic, which then quickly hardened into cold calculation. "She can't do that. You're her only son." "She did, Megan. She already did." Meanwhile, across town at Harrison Tower, George Miller had completed his task. The corner office on the 52nd floor, the one with the panoramic city view that Ethan was so proud of, was now completely bare. The family photos, the Harvard MBA degree, the expensive souvenirs from business trips, all gone. All that remained was the massive, empty mahogany desk, and in its very center, a single white piece of paper. On it, in my familiar, strong, and decisive handwriting, were 5 words: "This place is not for you." Ethan couldn't believe it. He had to go there. He had to see it for himself. He threw on some clothes, not bothering to shave or comb his hair. He looked like a man who had lost his soul. He ran downstairs, reaching for his car keys. But when he looked out the window, he froze. A yellow tow truck was parked in his driveway. 2 men in uniforms were expertly hooking a cable to his glossy black Mercedes S-Class, the car he had just gotten last week. He bolted outside, yelling, "What are you doing? That's my car." The tow truck driver, a tired-looking middle-aged man, held out a piece of paper. "Repossession order, sir. The lease was violated. Please step aside and let us do our job." Ethan stood frozen on the snow-dusted lawn, in his rumpled clothes, watching his luxury car get unceremoniously hauled away like a piece of trash. Neighbors from the surrounding mansions were starting to peek through their curtains. The humiliation was multiplied tenfold. He stumbled back inside, desperate. He had to get to the office. He called an Uber. During the entire ride downtown, his phone continued to ring off the hook. It wasn't just the banks anymore. Now it was the high-end boutiques, the private clubs, the fancy restaurants, all demanding payment for bills he'd never given a second thought. His world of privilege was collapsing by the minute. When the Uber pulled up in front of Harrison Tower, the building that bore his family's name, it felt alien to him. He walked into the magnificent marble lobby. The security guard at the front desk, a man he saw every day, looked at him with pity. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." "Morning," Ethan managed to reply, trying to act normal. He walked toward the executive security gates. He swiped his access card. Beep. Red light. He swiped it again. Beep. Red light. His face went white. The guard approached, his voice hesitant. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but your access has been deactivated. My orders are not to allow you upstairs." Just then, the elevator doors opened, and George Miller stepped out. He was wearing a formal suit, his face etched with sadness. He looked 10 years older. "George!" Ethan lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "George, you have to tell me what's going on. My mother, she's—" George gently removed Ethan's hand. "I'm sorry, Ethan. She's made her decision." "What decision? This is all just a misunderstanding. I need to talk to her." "She doesn't want to speak with you. And this isn't your place of work anymore. Your things have been boxed up and put in storage. You can contact HR to arrange for their retrieval." "What are you talking about? I'm the executive vice president. I'm a Harrison!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. George looked him straight in the eye, not as an uncle for the first time, but as an executive. "Not anymore, Ethan. I'm truly sorry. Now, if you don't leave peacefully, I'll have to call security." Those words were the final knife twist. To be threatened with security by the man he considered his uncle in the lobby of his own family's building. Ethan staggered backward. Every eye in the lobby was on him. The junior employees, the ones who used to cower before him, were now staring with a mixture of curiosity and pity. He turned and walked out of the building like a sleepwalker. The cold wind from the harbor whipped at him, but he felt nothing. It was colder inside of him. When he got home, the scene was even worse. A moving truck was parked out front. 2 men were carrying boxes marked Walter Jennings out to the truck, and on the front door, a court officer was taping a bright red piece of paper to the oak panel. "Eviction notice." His family had 24 hours to vacate. He walked inside. Chaos. Megan was directing the movers, not to pack up their family's belongings, but only the things that belonged to her and the children. "Megan, what are you doing?" She turned, looking at him with an expression he had never seen before. It was cold, distant, and full of contempt. "I'm doing what I have to do, Ethan. I'm protecting my children's future." "Our future? We're a family." "Family?" She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "I married the heir to Harrison Properties. You are not that man anymore. You are a zero. You have no house, no car, not a penny to your name. What kind of future can you offer me and the children?" The front door opened, and Walter Jennings walked in, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He didn't even bother to look at Ethan. "Hurry it up, Megan," he commanded. "We don't have all day." "But "But what about our plan?" Ethan stammered. "The biotech." Walter turned then, looking at him as if he were an insect. "What plan?" "That plan required collateral from Harrison Properties. You failed to deliver. You're useless." That's when Ethan completely broke. He had traded his own mother's dignity for this man's approval, and now that he was no longer useful, he was being discarded like trash. All the while, I sat in my study, looking out over the city. My phone remained off. I knew what was happening. I could imagine every detail, every sting, every humiliation. My heart ached. This was my only son, but I did not regret it. When a tree is diseased, sometimes the only way to save it is to cut off the rotten branches, no matter how much it hurts. The dawn of Christmas Day had arrived, and it had brought a final judgment. The house that had once been Ethan's pride, a symbol of his success, now served as a silent theater for his own tragedy. Walter Jennings's movers worked with a cruel efficiency. They took only what belonged to Megan and the children: the designer clothes, the expensive toys, the pieces of art Megan had selected. They left behind what belonged to the Harrison family: the porcelain dinner set I'd given them as a wedding gift, the old photo albums, and of course Ethan himself. He stood there, amidst the vast empty spaces in the rooms, like a forgotten piece of furniture, stripped of all value. Liam and Sophia huddled behind their mother, their eyes wide as they stared at their father. They weren't crying, they were just silent, a silence more terrifying than tears. I could only imagine the confusion and fear in their young hearts. Their secure, affluent world was crumbling before their very eyes, and the man who had caused the earthquake was their own father. When the last box was loaded, Megan turned to face Ethan one final time. Her mask of sweet pretense was gone. All that remained was the cold detachment of a businesswoman cutting her losses. "I'll have my lawyer send you my new address," she said, her voice flat. "You can arrange to visit the children on weekends, provided you have a decent place to live and can prove you're not a danger to them." "A danger?" Ethan repeated, his voice laced with bitterness. "Megan, I'm their father. A father who's been fired, is about to be homeless, and doesn't have a dime to his name," she shot back, without a flicker of hesitation. "That's not the role model I want for my children. It's better they stay with their grandfather for a while." She turned and led the children to the door. Sophia looked back at her father, her little lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but Megan pulled her along. The heavy oak door slammed shut, the boom echoing through the empty house. It was the sound of a final, full stop on a chapter of Ethan's life. He was alone, utterly alone. The silence closed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He looked around. The bare white walls, where expensive paintings once hung, now looked like scars. The floors, once covered in the footprints of his family, felt cold and alien. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just an empty shell. Desperation gave way to a frantic panic. He had to do something. He couldn't just accept this. He pulled out his phone. He had to call someone, anyone. But his contact list, once filled with the names of powerful people, now looked useless. Who would take a call from a fallen man? Who would help someone who had been publicly disowned by his own mother? But he had to try. His last, flickering hope was the very man he had tried so desperately to please. He dialed Walter Jennings. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He thought he wouldn't pick up. But then, the line connected. "What?" Walter's voice was curt and impatient. "Mr. Walter, it's me, Ethan," he said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you." "Please," Ethan was practically begging. "Just 5 minutes. I know I messed everything up, but we can still salvage this. The plan, the biotech, it's still there. I can find another way to raise the capital. I can talk to my mother again." A dry, cold chuckle came from the other end, a sound that made the blood in Ethan's veins turn to ice. "Talk to your mother? You think she'll listen to you? You shoved her to the ground in front of me. You showed me you're an emotional, out-of-control fool. You think a woman like Judith Harrison would ever trust her empire to someone like you. But I did it to impress you," Ethan blurted out, a pathetic confession. "Impress me?" Walter laughed louder. "Let me give you a lesson, son. In our world, respect isn't earned by trampling on people, especially not your own family. It's earned with strength, with wisdom, and with stability. You have none of those things. You're just an overgrown boy trying to sit at the adults' table." Every word from Walter was a hammer blow to Ethan's already shattered ego. I'm your family," he tried, grasping at straws. "Megan is my wife. Liam and Sophia are your grandchildren. And because they are my grandchildren, I have to get them away from the influence of a failure like you," Walter said, his voice turning cruel. "Megan and the children will live with me. They'll have everything they need. As for you, you're on your own. Don't ever call me again." Click. The line went dead. Ethan stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. The truth finally, painfully sank in. He hadn't just been punished by his mother. He had been cast out by everyone. He had bet everything on one hand, and he had lost it all. He hadn't just lost his wealth. He had lost his family, his identity, his very self. The court officer knocked on the open door. "Sir, your time is up. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Ethan had no fight left in him. He trudged upstairs to his bedroom. He opened the closet that was once full of $1,000 suits. Most were gone, taken by Megan. Only a few old things remained, things he'd worn before he was truly rich. He pulled an old suitcase from the top shelf and threw in a few changes of clothes, a few personal items. As he passed Liam's room, he paused. On his son's desk was a model ship they had built together last summer. He remembered the weekend afternoons they'd spent, painstakingly gluing the tiny wooden pieces. It was one of the few happy moments where he'd truly connected with his son, undistracted by work or ambition. He reached for the model, then pulled his hand back. He had no right to it. He had forfeited his right to be a father. He walked out of the house with a single suitcase in his hand. Evening was falling. The snow had started again. He had no idea where to go. He opened his wallet. He had a few $100s in cash. The credit cards were useless. His bank account was likely frozen. Where could he go with so little money in a city as expensive as Boston? He hailed a taxi. "Take me to a hotel downtown," he told the driver, his voice hollow. The car pulled away, leaving the wealthy neighborhood behind. Ethan looked back one last time. His mansion, under the streetlights and the falling snow, looked like a cold, giant monster, swallowing all his memories. That night, he checked into a small, cheap room in an old hotel near Chinatown. The room smelled of mildew. The wallpaper was stained yellow and peeling. From the window, he could hear the sound of sirens and the constant hum of the city that never slept. Just 24 hours ago, he had been sitting in a luxurious dining room, sipping fine wine. Now, he sat alone on the edge of a creaky bed, staring at the opposite wall. The silence in the room was more deafening than the chaos in his mind. There was no nagging from Megan, no sounds of his children playing. There was only him, his mistakes, and a regret that was beginning to eat him alive. He turned on the TV, just to have some sound fill the void. The local news was replaying footage of the Christmas tree lighting on Boston Common. Happy families, beaming children. Everything looked so cheerful, so normal. As if the collapse of his world was just a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of life. And then, he saw a familiar face, a short segment on charitable activities by the city's business leaders during the holidays. The camera panned across a charity gala, and he saw his mother. She was standing there, speaking with the governor, looking powerful and elegant in a deep blue evening gown. She was smiling. It was a polite, public smile, but she showed no sign of grief or distress. She looked like a queen ruling her kingdom, a kingdom that no longer had a place for him. Standing beside her was George Miller, looking flustered and uncomfortable in his new role. The reporter's voiceover said, "Mrs. Judith Harrison and the new executive vice president of Harrison Properties, Mr. George Miller." Ethan snapped the TV off. The final, most bitter truth hit him like a physical blow. His mother hadn't just punished him, she had moved on. Her world was functioning perfectly, maybe even better without him. He was not indispensable. He was just a mistake that could be easily corrected, a position that could be quickly filled. He collapsed onto the bed, burying his face in a pillow that smelled of dust and time. For the first time since he was a little boy, he cried, not tears of anger or self-pity, but the tears of true abject despair, the tears of a man who realized he hadn't just lost a fortune, he had lost everything. In that cheap hotel room, in the heart of a city that was no longer his, Ethan Harrison, the heir to an empire, died. All that was left was Ethan, a man alone, with nothing but a bleak future and a past full of regret. His journey was only just beginning, and the road ahead was going to be darker and harder than he could possibly imagine. The first few days after the earthquake were a chaotic blur of confusion and denial. Ethan wandered the streets of Boston like a ghost. The city he once felt he owned now looked at him with strange, judgmental eyes. Every skyscraper he passed was a towering reminder of the world from which he'd been exiled. He walked by Harrison Tower several times, just to stand across the street and look up at his old office, where the lights were still on at night, a clear sign that my empire was running smoothly without him. The small amount of cash in his wallet dwindled quickly. Even the cheap hotel room became a luxury. After 3 nights, he had to check out. Standing on the sidewalk with his single suitcase, he could feel the stares of passers-by. They didn't know who he was, but they saw a disheveled man with haunted eyes. He had become one of the invisible people he'd never once noticed before. Hunger is a cruel but effective teacher. The gnawing ache in his stomach soon overpowered the pain in his pride. He realized he couldn't just keep wandering. He needed a job, any job. He started by applying to smaller firms, construction and real estate companies where he thought the Harrison name might still carry some weight. He was wrong. News in Boston's business circles travels faster than wildfire. The story of Judith Harrison publicly firing and disinheriting her own son had become a cautionary tale. No one wanted to touch a man who had crossed the Iron Lady. One door after another slammed in his face. Some didn't even bother to open. "We're sorry, Mr. Harrison, but we don't have any positions that match your experience." They'd say, a polite refusal for a harsh truth. "We don't want your trouble." After dozens of rejections, the bitter reality began to sink in. The Harrison name was no longer a golden ticket, it was the brand of a failure. He had to shed his past, shed his ego, if he wanted to survive. One snowy afternoon, while taking shelter under a coffee shop awning, he saw a hiring notice taped to a lamppost. The paper was soaked and crumpled. The bold print read, "Seaport Industrial Cleaners, hiring night crew, no experience necessary." Seaport. The district had been his playground, a place where he'd negotiated lucrative commercial leases. Now, he had the chance to go back, not as a titan of industry, but as a janitor. The irony of it made him laugh. A dry, bitter sound. But hunger and cold are powerful motivators. He jotted down the address and phone number. The next day, he found the Seaport Cleaner's office in a modest old building in South Boston. It was a small, cluttered room that smelled strongly of bleach. The woman who interviewed him was named Maria, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and hands calloused from a lifetime of labor. She looked at the sparse application Ethan had managed to fill out, omitting all his glamorous former titles. "Ethan H.," she read aloud, her brow furrowed. "You've never done manual labor before, have you?" "No, ma'am," Ethan answered, his voice humble. "But I'm a hard worker, and I'm willing to learn. I really need this job." Maria looked him up and down. She saw a man who looked educated, who was dressed better than her usual applicants, but who had an unmistakable desperation in his eyes. "This ain't easy work," she said bluntly. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, cleaning offices, bathrooms, taking out the trash. Starts at $15 an hour, paid weekly. You think you can handle that?" "I can handle it," Ethan said without a trace of hesitation. "All right," Maria nodded. "You start tomorrow night. You'll get a uniform and your supplies. Don't be late, I got no time for slackers." The next night, Ethan Harrison put on the gray and blue uniform of Seaport Cleaners. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. He was assigned to a 3-person crew, responsible for cleaning a newly constructed office building in the Seaport district. It was, ironically, one of the buildings Harrison Properties had invested in. That first night was hell. His body, accustomed to plush leather chairs, was now forced to bend and scrub floors, to lift heavy bags of trash. His muscles screamed in protest. The smell of chemical cleaners made him nauseous. His 2 crewmates, an immigrant from El Salvador named Carlos and a young college student named Ben, worked in efficient silence. They didn't talk much, just showed him how to operate the industrial vacuum and how to wipe the glass walls without leaving streaks. They had no idea who he was, and that, strangely, was a relief. Here, he wasn't Ethan Harrison, son of Judith Harrison. He was just Ethan, the new guy. His worth wasn't measured by his bank account or his title, but by whether or not he could get a coffee stain out of the carpet. During their 2 a.m. break, the three of them sat in a cramped supply closet, eating sandwiches they'd brought from home. "You don't seem like the type for this kind of work," Ben, the student, said, his curiosity getting the better of him. Ethan just shrugged. "Life takes you to some unexpected places." Carlos, the older man, nodded with a knowing look. "Everyone has a story," he said in his accented English. "In this country, if you work hard, you don't starve." Those simple words held a profound truth that Ethan had never truly understood. He'd always seen his wealth as an entitlement, not the result of labor. Now he was learning that lesson from the ground up. The first week passed in a haze of exhaustion. Every morning he'd return to the cheap room he was now sharing with 2 other men, his body aching. He'd sleep until the afternoon, then get up and prepare for another night of toil. The routine was monotonous, grueling, but it offered a strange kind of stability. At the end of the week, he received his first paycheck, over $500 in cash, in a brown paper envelope. He held the bills in his hand, feeling their weight. These weren't just numbers on a bank statement. This was the product of 40 hours of back-breaking work, of sweat and sore muscles. He had never felt so proud of money in his life. He used part of it to pay his rent, part of it for food, and he saved a little, putting it in an old tin box. He thought of his children. He missed them with a physical ache. According to the arrangement, he was allowed to visit them, but he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He looked haggard and exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. He couldn't let his children see him like this. He needed to pull himself together, at least mentally, before he could face them. He decided to write to them instead of calling. He didn't want Megan to hear the desperation in his voice. He bought a pad of paper and a pen. He sat in his cramped room and wrote in careful, neat script. "My dearest Liam and Sophia, I'm writing this to tell you that I miss you and love you both very much. I know things have been difficult and confusing lately. I made a very big mistake, one that hurt a lot of people, especially your grandmother. I'm trying to fix myself. My job is very different now, but it's teaching me a lot about hard work and humility. I promise you, when I'm a better man, a father you can be proud of, I will come and see you. Please take care of each other and listen to your mother. All my love, Dad." He sent the letter without a return address. He didn't expect a reply. He just needed them to know he was still out there, and that he was trying. In the following weeks, the work became routine. His body adapted to the physical strain. He learned to be more efficient. He started talking more with Carlos and Ben. He heard their stories about their families, their dreams, their struggles. His world, which had once revolved around multi-million-dollar deals and lavish parties, was now expanding to include the everyday battles of ordinary people. One night, while cleaning the offices of a law firm on the 40th floor, he paused by the massive plate glass window. From there, he could see the entire Boston skyline, glittering like a galaxy. He had seen this same view from his own office, but with a completely different perspective. Then, he had looked down on the city as a conqueror, an owner. Now, he looked out at it as a small, anonymous part of its whole. The shift didn't make him feel small. On the contrary, it made him feel like he was part of something bigger. He was one of millions of people working, contributing, keeping this city running. His job might be to clean the floors, but it was a necessary cog in the machine. Humility hadn't come to him as a choice. It had come as a condition for survival. And in that forced humility, Ethan was beginning to find something he had lost long ago, something more valuable than money or status. The cold winter months in Boston slowly gave way to the damp days of spring. For Ethan, time was now measured in night shifts, in bills paid, and in the unanswered letters he sent faithfully to his children. He had moved from sharing a room to renting a tiny studio apartment in Allston, a neighborhood of students and working-class people. It was a single room that served as his bedroom and living room, with a minuscule kitchen. But it was his own space, an accomplishment earned with his own 2 hands. He had become a skilled cleaner. Maria, his supervisor, had started giving him more trusted assignments, like cleaning high-security offices or medical labs. She didn't ask about his past, but she saw the diligence and responsibility in this quiet man. Ethan no longer felt ashamed of his job. It was part of the new person he was building. Meanwhile, in another world, in my luxurious penthouse in Beacon Hill, I was fighting my own battle. The cough was getting worse. The dull ache in my side was becoming more constant. I was losing weight, and my designer clothes were starting to hang off my frame. I tried to hide it. I told George Miller and my associates that I was on a new diet. I told my grandchildren that Grandma was just a little tired, but I couldn't fool myself, and I certainly couldn't fool my doctor. Dr. Daniels, a kind, silver-haired man who had been our family doctor for years, looked at my latest CT scan, his expression grave. "Judith," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "we can't put this off any longer. The tumor is growing back, and it's more aggressive this time. Chemotherapy is just a stopgap. The only real option left is major surgery." "What are the odds, David?" I asked bluntly, cutting to the chase. I was a businesswoman. I was used to assessing risk. He hesitated. "The surgery is extremely complex. We'd have to remove part of your liver and diaphragm. The odds of getting it all and surviving the operation. Honestly, Judith, they're not good. Maybe 20%, maybe less. 20%. In business, those were odds no sane investor would take. But this wasn't business. This was my life. And if I don't have the surgery, you'll have about 6 months, maybe less, and the last few months will be very painful." I sat there in the sterile examination room, staring out the window. Spring had arrived. The first buds were blossoming in the Boston Public Garden. The world was moving on, beautiful and indifferent. I had lived a full life. I had built an empire. I had loved and been loved. But there was one piece of unfinished business. I wasn't sure if Ethan was truly back on his own 2 feet yet. "I need some time to think," I told Dr. Daniels. Time, ironically, was the one thing I didn't have much of. I threw myself into my work, a way to forget the death sentence hanging over my head. George Miller and I had stabilized the company after Ethan's abrupt departure. George was a capable manager, but he lacked my strategic vision and my calculated audacity. The company needed me. My legacy needed me. But more than anything, my grandchildren needed me. Megan, after leaving Ethan, had quickly immersed the children in a new, lavish life under Walter Jennings's patronage. She enrolled them in the most expensive private schools, bought them the latest designer, everything. But I knew that what they really needed wasn't money. It was stability. It was love. And they needed to know the truth. I fought for the right to see them every weekend. Megan initially resisted, but a brief call from my lawyer, reminding her of certain clauses in her prenuptial agreement, quickly changed her mind. Those weekends became my lifeline. I took them to museums, to plays, for long walks along the Charles River. We didn't talk about Ethan. It was an unspoken rule, but I knew he was a constant presence in their thoughts. One Sunday afternoon, as Sophia and I were baking cookies in my kitchen, she suddenly asked, her voice small, "Grandma is Dad okay?" My hands stilled, my heart clenched. "Why do you ask, my little angel?" She looked up at me with her big, clear eyes. "Mommy won't let us see him. She says he's finding himself, but I get letters from him. He says he misses us." So, he was still writing. A part of me felt a wave of relief, but another part felt a sharp pang of pain. I knelt down to her level, taking her small, flower-dusted hands in mine. "Your father is going through a difficult time, Sophia. He made a mistake, and now he's learning how to be responsible for it. That takes time. But is he coming back?" That innocent question was a knife to my heart. What could I say? That I didn't know? That her father's future depended on whether he could truly change? "I hope so, my love," was all I could manage, pulling her into a hug. "I truly hope so." That night, after I dropped the children off, I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I called George Miller. "George," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to do something for me, something personal. Anything, Judith. I want you to find out how Ethan is living, not to interfere, absolutely not. Just to know, does he have a place to stay? Is he okay?" George was silent for a moment. "I understand, Judith. Leave it with me." 2 days later, George came to my office with a thin manila folder. He said nothing, just placed it on my desk. I opened it. Inside were a few pages of a report and several photographs taken from a distance. They were grainy and indistinct, but I could still recognize my son. I saw him in a blue worker's uniform, pushing an industrial trash bin. I saw him sitting alone in a cheap diner, eating a plate of pasta. I saw him walking down the street, his face gaunt and tired, but there was something in his eyes, a look of determination. The last photo made my breath catch in my throat. It was a picture of him mailing a letter in a public mailbox, undoubtedly one of the letters to his children. The report was brief. Ethan Harrison, currently employed by Seaport Cleaners, night shift, renting a studio apartment in Alston, no outstanding debts, no public disturbances. Living a quiet, almost reclusive life. I closed the folder, fighting back tears. Part of me ached. My son, the heir to Harrison Properties, reduced to this. But another part of me, the rational, ruthless part, felt a flicker of hope. He hadn't given up. He hadn't turned to drink or gambling. He was working, an honest manual labor job. He was picking himself up. George stood there waiting patiently. "He's still working, ma'am," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "He didn't quit." "I see that, George," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Thank you." After George left, I sat alone in my vast office, staring at the photos. My decision had been the right one. My cruelty had been productive. He was starting to learn his lesson. But what about me? Would I have enough time to see him finish it? That evening, I called Dr. Daniels back. "David," I said, "schedule the surgery." The hidden truth wasn't just about Ethan's new life. The bigger truth was about my own mortal battle. I had decided to bet on those slim 20% odds. I wasn't doing it for myself. I was doing it for Ethan. I wanted to live, even for just a little while longer, for the chance to see my son become the man that Arthur and I had always hoped he would be. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late April. The Boston sky that day was an impossible, cloudless blue. The magnolia trees in the public garden were in full, glorious bloom, a riot of pink and white. It was a beautiful day to begin a fight for one's life. I had arranged everything quietly. I told the board I was having a pre-planned medical procedure and would be out of commission for a few weeks. George Miller would be in charge. I told my grandchildren that Grandma was going on a trip to recharge her batteries. I didn't want them to worry. No one knew the truth except for me, Dr. Daniels, and my lawyer, Samuel Black. That morning, I arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital very early. I didn't take my usual car service. I just called a cab. I didn't want to draw attention. I was just another patient, another number among the thousands fighting their battles in this massive building. Samuel Black was waiting for me in the vast, busy main lobby. Despite his expensive suit, he looked out of place among the nurses, doctors, and the worried faces of other families. He looked more nervous than I felt. "Judith," he said, his voice low and urgent as we found a quiet corner. "Are you absolutely sure you don't want me to tell Ethan? This is his last chance. The boy has a right to know." I looked my old friend, who had been through so much with me, straight in the eye. I shook my head, a small but firm gesture. "No, Sam. Think about it," I explained, my voice steady, without a tremor. "If the surgery fails, if I don't make it, he will live the rest of his life with the guilt that he never made peace with his mother. That regret would destroy him more than any punishment I could ever devise. I won't have that." I paused, taking a deep breath. "And if a miracle happens, and I survive, I want him to come to me out of genuine remorse, born from self-awareness, not out of pity for a sick old woman. Do you understand, Sam? This lesson must be seen through to the end. My decision is final." I handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with the red wax crest of Harrison Properties. Inside was everything I wanted to say, my heart laid bare on paper. "Only when the nurse is wheeling me into the operating room, when that door begins to close, I want you to go find him. Hand him this letter personally. Make sure he reads it alone. Do you promise me?" Sam nodded, his old eyes glistening with unshed tears. He took my hand. "I promise, Judith. God be with you." The nurses came. They called my name, Judith Harrison. their voices professional and detached. They dressed me in a pale blue hospital gown, baggy and impersonal. They checked my vitals. Everything moved with a pre-programmed efficiency. I felt so small, so powerless. The Iron Lady of Boston was now just a 72-year-old woman, placing her fate in the hands of a scalpel and grim statistics. They put me on a gurney. The wheels rolled down the long white corridor, the steady click-clack the only sound I could hear. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling streaked past my face. I could see Sam walking alongside me, his face a mask of worry. We arrived at a set of large metal doors that read, "Surgical Area, Restricted Access." This was it. A nurse began to push me through. "Sam," I called, my voice weaker now. He leaned in close. "Go now," I whispered. "Find him." The heavy metal doors began to swing shut, cutting off the image of Sam and the world outside. In the last sliver of an opening, I saw him turn and walk away quickly, the white envelope in his hand like a torch in the gloom. Samuel Black drove out of stately Beacon Hill and headed toward Alston. It was a journey through two different Bostons. From the quiet, cobblestone streets and historic mansions, he drove into the loud, bustling neighborhoods where apartment buildings stood shoulder to shoulder and the air was thick with the smells of everyday life. He found Ethan's address. It was an old brick building with a rattling elevator and a hallway that smelled of a dozen different meals being cooked. Sam, in his bespoke suit and polished leather shoes, looked completely out of place. He knocked on apartment 3B. After a moment, the door opened. Ethan stood there. He had just gotten home from his night shift, still wearing his faded work uniform, his face drawn with fatigue. He was thinner, older, but his eyes were clearer, the old arrogance gone, replaced by a deep weariness and a quiet sadness. When he saw Samuel Black, my son froze. Confusion and alarm washed over his face. The appearance of this lawyer from his old world was the last thing he expected. "Mr. Black?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Sam didn't answer right away. He glanced past Ethan into the small apartment, seeing an unmade bed, a small table with a few books, and a tidy kitchenette. It was humble, but it was clean. That was a good sign. "May I come in, Ethan?" Sam asked formally. Ethan hesitated for a second, then nodded and stepped back. Sam entered, feeling the stark contrast to the sprawling spaces he was used to. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room and faced Ethan. "I'm here on behalf of your mother," Sam said, getting straight to the point. Ethan's heart seemed to stop. "My mother? Is she okay?" "She asked me to give you this," Sam said, deflecting the direct question. He pulled the white envelope from his coat pocket and held it out. "She wanted you to read it alone." Ethan stared at the envelope. He recognized his mother's handwriting where she had written his name. His hand trembled as he took it. It felt impossibly heavy. "What is it, Mr. Black?" Ethan asked again, his voice now tinged with fear. "What's wrong with my mother?" Sam just shook his head. "Just read it, Ethan. It's all in there." After Sam left, Ethan stood alone in the room, staring at the letter. A vague sense of dread washed over him. He sat on the edge of his bed, took a deep breath, and carefully broke the seal. He pulled out a sheaf of handwritten pages. His mother's script, though slightly shaky, was as strong and decisive as she was. He began to read. "My son Ethan, if you are reading this letter, it means I am in an operating room, facing a battle I may not win." Ethan's eyes flew open. "Surgery?" He read on, a growing numbness spreading through his limbs, his breath catching in his throat. The letter explained everything. The cancer I had hidden for 2 years, the metastasis, the slim odds of survival. Each word was a blow. His mother, the woman he had always seen as invincible, the woman he both resented and revered, was facing death, and he, her only son, had had no idea. Then the letter turned to that fateful Christmas Eve. "That night, when you pushed me, the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I didn't just see a thoughtless act. I saw a man who had lost his way, a man willing to trade his family's dignity for hollow approval. I knew I didn't have much time, and I had to act decisively. I took everything from you not for revenge, but to force you to face yourself, to give you a chance to rebuild your character from nothing before I was gone." Ethan began to tremble, hot tears streaming down his cheeks. He remembered the look on his mother's face, the shock, the pain in her eyes, and he realized that pain wasn't just humiliation, it was the despair of a mother who knew she might have to leave her lost son behind. The letter continued, with a sudden, unexpected tenderness. "I've been watching you, Ethan. I know about your job, about this small apartment. I know you didn't give up, and I am more proud of you, more proud of the man you are fighting to become than I ever was of any CEO title. A true legacy isn't buildings, it's the strength of one's character. I hope I've given you the chance to find that strength." At the end of the letter, there were practical instructions, but they were wrapped in an immeasurable love. "I have set up a trust for Liam and Sophia. They will be well taken care of. For you, I have left a monthly stipend. It's not much, just enough for you to live modestly, on the condition that you continue to work. I don't want you to be rich. I want you to have self-respect. That is my final gift to you. Live a good life, my son. Be the father your children deserve." The letter fell from Ethan's numb fingers, the pages fluttering to the floor. His world shattered all over again. But this time, it wasn't for the loss of money or status. It was for the loss of something infinitely greater. He crumpled to the floor, his head in his hands, and he wept. Great, heaving, broken sobs, the cries of an abandoned child, of a man realizing his own unforgivable mistake. He wasn't crying because he was afraid his mother would die. He was crying because he realized that while he was busy struggling with his own new life, his mother had been facing a death sentence, alone. He hadn't been there for her, he hadn't had the chance to say he was sorry. The greatest punishment wasn't poverty. The greatest punishment was regret. Despair washed over him. But then, a flicker of hope. If you are reading this letter, it means I am in an operating room. Am. Present tense. It wasn't over. There was still a chance. He looked up at Samuel Black, his eyes red and pleading. "Which hospital? Tell me which hospital she's in." "Mass General," Sam replied, his voice full of sympathy. "Surgery on the 5th floor." Ethan didn't say another word. He scrambled to his feet. He didn't grab a coat, didn't grab his wallet. He just burst out of the door and bolted down the stairs. He ran into the street, in his work clothes that still smelled of bleach and dust. He ran like he'd never run before. He sprinted through the streets, bumping into pedestrians. Horns blared, people yelled, but he heard nothing. The only sounds in his ears were the frantic pounding of his own heart and the words from his mother's letter. He was running for his life. He was running toward a sliver of hope. He was running to his mother, and I, lying on that operating table, under the brilliant lights, was slowly drifting into the fog of anesthesia. My last conscious thought was, "Be well, my son, Ethan." I had no idea that at that very moment, my son was running, racing across the city to get to my side. Ethan's journey through the streets of Boston was a desperate race against time and regret. His lungs burned, and his muscles, already weary from a night of labor, screamed in protest. But he didn't stop. The image of his mother, alone on an operating table, the image of her trembling handwriting on the letter that was the fuel that propelled him forward. He reached Mass General Hospital in a state of near collapse. He burst into the main lobby, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. People stared at him. A man in a dirty work uniform who looked like he had just escaped some disaster. And in a way, he had. "Surgery? 5th floor?" he choked out to a nurse at the information desk. She pointed toward the elevators. When he reached the surgical waiting area on the 5th floor, he saw Samuel Black sitting in a chair, his head bowed. The green light above the operating room door was still on, a silent indicator that the battle inside was still being waged. Ethan didn't dare approach. He just stood at the end of the hall, leaning against the wall, feeling the last of his strength leave him. He slid to the floor, his head in his hands. All he could do now was wait. Time passed with a torturous slowness. Each minute felt like an hour. The hallway was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional hurried squeak of a gurney's wheels. Ethan didn't dare sleep. He just sat there, staring at that green light, as if his gaze alone could send some strength, some hope, through those sterile doors. He prayed. For the first time in years, he prayed with a desperate sincerity, not for money or success, but for a little more time, for his mother, and for him. 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours. Suddenly, The green light went out. Ethan's heart stopped. The metal doors swung open. A doctor emerged, his face hidden by a surgical mask, his posture weary. It was Dr. Daniels. Sam shot to his feet, and Ethan managed to struggle up, his legs trembling. Dr. Daniels pulled off his mask. He looked at the two waiting men, and a tired but genuine smile touched his lips. "The surgery was a success," he said. "We got the entire tumor. She is one tough lady. Now it all depends on her recovery. But we managed to do the impossible." Ethan felt his knees buckle. He had to grab the wall to keep from collapsing. A dizzying wave of relief washed over him. Not explosive joy, just a deep, profound, quiet gratitude. His mother had been given another chance, and so had he. In the days that followed, Ethan made the hospital corridor his home. He never left. The nurses grew accustomed to the sight of the man in work clothes, sitting quietly in a waiting room chair or pacing restlessly. He would only go home for a few hours each day to shower and put on a clean set of his old, worn clothes. Sam had offered him money, but he'd refused. "I can manage," he said. He wasn't allowed in the intensive care unit where I was being closely monitored. He could only see me through a small glass window. He saw me lying there, still and pale, surrounded by a web of machines and tubes. My face was swollen and colorless from the surgery, but he could see the steady rise and fall of my chest, and that was enough. He would stand there for hours every day, just watching. He would talk to me through the glass, knowing I couldn't hear. "Mom, it's me, Ethan," he'd whisper, his hand pressed against the cool pane. "You be strong now. I'm right here waiting for you. I'm not going anywhere." After a week, I was moved to a regular recovery room. I was still incredibly weak but stable. For the first time, Ethan was allowed to come in. He entered the room as quietly as a shadow. I was asleep, my breathing shallow. He sat in the chair beside my bed, not daring to make a sound. He just sat there and took my hand, a frail, bruised hand. He could feel the weak but steady pulse. He sat like that all night. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I saw was my son's face. He had fallen asleep in the chair, his head resting on the edge of the bed, his hand still holding mine. He looked exhausted, with a rough stubble on his chin and dark circles under his eyes. But in sleep, his face had a peacefulness I hadn't seen in a very long time. I stirred slightly, and he woke instantly. His eyes flew open and met mine. A long moment of silence passed between us. We just looked at each other. No words were necessary. In his eyes, I saw it all: the remorse, the worry, the love. The next few days were a series of quiet, meaningful moments. Ethan cared for me with a devotion that was humbling. He helped the nurses change my sheets. He fed me spoonfuls of thin broth. He read to me from the classic novels I loved, his low, steady voice, more soothing than any pain medication. We didn't talk about the company, or money, or Megan and Walter Jennings. We didn't talk about that Christmas Eve. It was an unspoken agreement to let the past lie dormant. Instead, we talked about old times. "Remember that time we went fishing at Walden Pond?" Ethan asked one afternoon. "I dropped the whole can of worms in the water, and you laughed so hard you cried." I managed a weak smile. "I remember. You were 10 years old. You started crying because you thought the fish would have nothing to eat." Together, we revisited those memories, finding our way back to moments of innocence and happiness. It was a way of mending, of rebuilding the bridge between us with the bricks of our shared past. Then, a week later, one late afternoon as the orange sunset streamed through the window, I was strong enough to sit up, propped against my pillows. Ethan was peeling an apple for me, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft. He finished, cut a small slice, and offered it to me. I took it. The room was quiet. "Mom," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. He put the knife and the apple down and turned to look me straight in the eye. "I'm sorry." Just those 2 words, but they held the weight of a year of pain and regret. "I'm sorry for everything," he continued, the tears of a grown man finally falling. "I'm sorry I was so stupid, so arrogant. I'm sorry I hurt you that Christmas. I don't even know what I was thinking. I was just trying to prove myself, and I went about it all the wrong way. I trampled on the most important thing, and that was you." He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. "The most important thing to you was always family dignity and legacy, and I threw it all at someone else's feet. I was so wrong, Mom. I was unforgivably wrong." I looked at my son, my heart aching and soaring at the same time. This was it. These were the words I had been waiting for, the words I had gambled my life to hear. An apology that asked for nothing in return, but came from the very depths of his soul. I said nothing. I just held out my arms. Ethan looked up, his eyes blurred with tears. He hesitated for a moment, then he fell into my embrace, clinging to my frail frame. He was a large man, but right then, he was just a little boy seeking the safest harbor he had ever known. I wrapped my arms around him, patting his back, just as I had done 1,000 times when he was small. We held each other like that, in the fading light of the sunset. The hug didn't erase the scars. It couldn't bring back the lost time, but it warmed two souls who had been through so much pain. In that sunset, it was the beginning of a final healing. And so, the storm had passed, but its effects lingered. And that's how our story goes. That hug in the hospital wasn't a happily ever after. No, real life doesn't have such easy endings. It was just a quiet moment, a truce, a time when two exhausted soldiers in a family war looked at each other and realized they didn't want to fight anymore. It's only now, sitting here in the quiet of my old age, that I can truly appreciate the lessons that storm brought. I've realized that a mother's love is the most complicated thing in the world. It's not always a gentle stream. Sometimes it has to be a volcano, erupting to destroy a barren landscape so that its ashes can create new, fertile soil. I had to become that volcano. I had to destroy my son's world, a world built on privilege and arrogance, to save his soul. It was the cruelest and most loving thing I have ever done. I spent my life building Harrison properties, stacking steel and glass to create skyscrapers that reached for the clouds. I thought that was my legacy, something solid, enduring, a testament to success. But I was wrong. A building, no matter how tall, is just an empty shell. It has no heart, no soul. The real legacy that my late husband Arthur and I wanted to leave behind wasn't in the numbers on a balance sheet. It was an honorable man, a man who knew the value of hard work, who respected others, and most importantly, who respected himself. And to build that legacy, sometimes you have to tear down the faulty structures first. Our healing was slow and awkward. It was like trying to piece together a shattered vase. The pieces can be glued back, but the cracks will always be there. Some days, we would just sit and drink tea in silence, not knowing what to say. The past was like a giant elephant in the room. But then, on other days, Ethan would tell me about his work, about Carlos, the immigrant co-worker who taught him resilience. I would tell him about Liam and Sophia's antics. Little by little, we filled the space between us with the stories of our present, instead of dwelling on the past. I didn't give him the company back. I didn't return him to his life of luxury. The small stipend continued, and he continued with his job. But a profound change had occurred. Sometimes, on weekends, he would come over, not as a CEO but as a son. He would fix a leaky faucet for me, or just sit and watch an old movie. His hands, once soft from a life of signing papers, were now calloused and rough. But to me, they were the most beautiful hands in the world, because they were proof of a rebirth. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. I will never forget the coldness of that marble floor, or the pain of being pushed by my own son. But forgiveness is looking at Ethan now, and no longer seeing the arrogant man from that Christmas Eve. I see a different man, a man with a quiet calm in his eyes, a humility in his posture, and a warmth in his small actions. Forgiveness is accepting that people can change, and giving them the space to prove it. The greatest legacy a mother can leave, you see, isn't a path strewn with roses. It's giving her children the strength to walk their own rocky paths. Sometimes, that means stepping back, letting them stumble, even letting them fall hard, because it's only in picking themselves up from that fall that they truly discover how strong they are. I spent my life building skyscrapers, but now I realize my greatest, most complex, and proudest construction wasn't Harrison Tower. It was witnessing the reconstruction of a soul. It was building a man back up from the rubble of his own mistakes. And that, my dear friend, is my final legacy.